Before you scroll, take a breath with me. Right now, something inside you brought you here. Welcome to Therapist Live. This is more than a channel. It's a space for clarity, healing, and real emotional growth. Here, we talk about mental health, self-awareness, relationships, and the patterns that shape your life. If you're ready to understand yourself on a deeper level, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because this journey starts today. Take a deep breath, and let's begin. Imagine surviving a minor car accident with nothing more than a concussion, only to wake up and find that the entire world has been drained of color. This is exactly what happened to Jonathan I, a highly successful artist whose life was defined by brilliant hues and vibrant canvases. After his accident, everything looked like it was shrouded in a dirty, gray fog. The skin of his loved ones looked like gray rat fur, making him lose all interest in physical intimacy. Even his food looked repulsive, forcing him to eat only things that were naturally black or white, like black olives and yogurt. Before the accident, he had a beautiful condition called synesthesia, where hearing musical notes would trigger bursts of color in his mind. That, too, was entirely gone. Jonathan hadn't damaged his eyes in the crash. His retinas were perfectly fine. He had damaged a tiny, highly specialized processing center in his cerebral cortex. His tragic story reveals a terrifying, mind-bending truth. Color does not actually exist in the physical world outside your head. Red, blue, and green are not physical properties of the universe. They are illusions, biological hallucinations generated entirely by the dark, silent lump of tissue sitting inside your skull. Welcome back to our exploration of the human mind, guided by the incredible science within the pages of brain and behavior. In our last episode, we explored the grand architecture of the nervous system and how the brain literally wires itself together. Today, we are going to look at the ultimate magic trick. We are going to explore how your brain takes meaningless physical energy from the outside world and constructs the vibrant, noisy, 3D reality you experience every single second of your life. Have you ever stopped to think about how dark it is inside your head? Your brain has no direct contact with the outside world. It sits in total blackness and absolute silence. It doesn't see light, and it doesn't hear sound. All it receives is a chaotic storm of electrical impulses, action potentials, racing down nerve fibers from your sensory organs. Back in the 19th century, a scientist named Johannes Müller realized something profound. The brain doesn't know what kind of physical energy started the electrical signal. It only knows which wire the signal is traveling down. This is why if you fall off a skateboard and hit the back of your head hard against the pavement, you literally see stars. The mechanical force of the impact triggers the neurons in your visual cortex, and your brain obediently fabricates flashes of light. Your reality is simply a translation. Let's look at the primary way you navigate the world. Vision, what we call visible light, is actually just a ridiculously tiny sliver of the massive electromagnetic spectrum. We are completely blind to radio waves, microwaves, X-rays, and ultraviolet light. Light enters the front of your eye and strikes the retina at the back, which is actually a piece of the brain that was pushed out into the eyeball during fetal development. Here, millions of specialized receptors called rods and cones capture the light. The rods are packed with a chemical called rhodopsin, which is incredibly sensitive to dim light, but cannot see color, which is why your bedroom looks like a black and white movie when the lights are off. The cones, packed with a chemical called iodopsin, require bright light and give us our spectacular high-definition color vision. But the retina doesn't just act like a dumb camera recording pixels. It is a supercomputer that aggressively edits the image before sending it to the brain. Our visual system is completely obsessed with finding the edges of objects. In fact, specialized cells in the retina actively inhibit their neighbors in a process called lateral inhibition, which artificially enhances the contrast between light and dark boundaries. Your eyes are literally tricking you to make the edges of objects pop out more clearly, so you don't trip over them. This obsession with lines and edges continues deep inside the brain. In the 1950s, Two researchers named David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel were implanting microscopic electrodes into the visual cortex of cats, trying to figure out what made the neurons fire. For days, they projected black dots onto a screen, but the brain cells remained completely silent. The researchers were incredibly frustrated. Then, by sheer accident, as they slipped a glass slide into their projector, the sharp, dark shadow of the edge of the glass moved across the screen. Suddenly, the audio monitor connected to the cat's brain cell went off like a machine gun. They had discovered that individual neurons in the brain are hardwired to respond only to specific lines and edges moving at specific angles. It was a monumental discovery that won them the Nobel Prize. Once your brain has extracted these basic lines and edges, it splits the visual information into two entirely different processing streams. The where stream travels up to the top of your brain, into the parietal lobes, and calculates where the object is in space and how fast it is moving. The what stream travels down into the temporal lobes to figure out what the object actually is, analyzing its shape and color. When these specific modules break down, the results are deeply bizarre. Imagine suffering a stroke and suddenly losing the ability to recognize everyday objects by sight. This is called object agnosia. The famous neurologist Oliver Sacks treated a brilliant music professor who had this exact condition. The man's intellect was perfectly fine, but he would affectionately pat the tops of fire hydrants and parking meters, genuinely believing they were children. Or consider prosopagnosia, a condition where the specific brain area responsible for processing human faces is damaged. A young man with this condition reported talking to a wonderful woman at a party, walking away to grab 2 drinks, and upon turning back around, realizing he had completely forgotten what she looked like and was utterly unable to find her in the crowd. His eyes worked perfectly, but his brain had lost the ability to bind those visual details into the concept of a face. If our eyes and our visual cortex can deceive us so profoundly, what about our ears? Wait until you hear how a blind teenager taught himself to ride a bicycle through heavy traffic using nothing but his tongue. While vision relies on electromagnetic radiation, hearing relies on something much more physical: the vibration of pressurized air. When someone speaks, they're literally sending a wave of compressed air across the room. This wave strikes your tympanic membrane, or eardrum, which vibrates and moves 3 of the tiniest bones in your entire body: the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. These bones act like microscopic crowbars, amplifying the sound energy by 30 times. They punch against a fluid-filled, snail-shaped tube called the cochlea. Inside the cochlea, a wave of fluid sweeps over the organ of Corti, bending thousands of microscopic hair cells. When these hair cells bend, they fire off electrical action potentials. Your brain is a master of auditory calculation. How do you know if a car is approaching from your left or your right? Your brain is constantly calculating the microscopic difference in the time it takes for a sound wave to hit your left ear versus your right ear. We are talking about fractions of a millisecond, yet specialized coincidence detector neurons in your brainstem use this timing gap to map exactly where the sound came from. This auditory mapping is so powerful that it can actually replace vision. Consider Daniel Kish, a man who lost both of his eyes to cancer when he was just a year old. Despite having no eyes, Daniel routinely rides a bicycle in busy traffic and hikes through dense forests without assistance. How? He uses active echolocation by making sharp clicking sounds with his tongue 2 or 3 times a second. He listens to the echoes bouncing off his surroundings. His brain processes these subtle auditory cues to identify the shape, distance, and density of objects. But here is the most astonishing part. When researchers placed Daniel in an fMRI scanner, they found that the sound echoes weren't just lighting up his auditory cortex. His brain had literally rewired itself. The echoes were activating his visual cortex because his brain was starved of light. It hijacked the unused visual hardware to build a 3-dimensional, spatial map of the world using sound. He is literally seeing with his ears. We have explored the magic of sight and the mechanics of sound. But we must now look at the ultimate human miracle, the phenomenon that occurs when we combine our auditory processing, our vocal cords, and our highest cognitive functions. I am talking about language. Right now, I am exhaling air from my lungs, vibrating the fleshy folds of my throat, and shaping the air with my lips and tongue. These sound waves are hitting your ear, and as a result, I am successfully planting highly complex, specific ideas directly into your consciousness. Language is a biological superpower, and for about 90% of humans, the machinery for this superpower is located entirely in the left hemisphere of the brain. In the 1860s, a French doctor named Paul Broca treated a patient who could understand everything said to him, but could only utter a single syllable, tan. After the patient died, an autopsy revealed a massive hole in the left frontal lobe of his brain. This area, now called Broca's area, is the engine of speech production and grammar. When it is damaged, the resulting condition is called Broca's aphasia, or expressive aphasia. A patient named Mr. Ford suffered from this after a stroke. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, but he could only force out agonizing, halting strings of nouns and verbs like head, false stroke, Migos speech practice. He had lost all the grammatical glue that holds sentences together, yet his intellect remained perfectly intact. Further back in the left temporal lobe lies an entirely different language center, discovered by Carl Wernicke. If Broca's area is the engine of speaking, Wernicke's area is the engine of meaning. When this area is damaged, the tragedy of Wernicke's aphasia unfolds. These patients can speak fluently, with perfect rhythm, intonation, and grammar, but the words they string together form absolute nonsense, a phenomenon neurologists call word salad. One researcher described a heartbreaking conversation with an elderly nursing home resident. When the researcher simply said, "Pardon me," the woman fluently replied, "She's in the frim-fram." The most chilling aspect of this disorder is that the patients are usually completely unaware that they're speaking gibberish, because the very brain area required to comprehend language is broken. For centuries, human arrogance dictated that language was a divine gift bestowed only upon our species. But science has begun to blur that line. While animals communicate with primitive signals of danger or hunger, some higher primates show astonishing linguistic potential. Consider Kanzi, a captive bonobo ape. Researchers were actually trying to teach his mother how to communicate using a computerized keyboard of symbols. The mother struggled, but the young infant Kanzi, simply by watching, spontaneously learned to use the keyboard himself. Without any formal instruction, Kanzi learned over 150 symbols, using them to request specific foods, ask to visit certain locations, and even tell researchers to chase other people. His comprehension of spoken English and symbolic communication reached the level of a 2-year-old human child. We are not quite as completely separate from the animal kingdom as we like to believe. Everything you have experienced today, the colors of your room, the sound of my voice, the meaning of these very words, is an active construction. Your reality is a brilliant, highly edited simulation generated by 86 billion neurons firing in the dark. But what drives this magnificent machine? If the brain can build reality, what makes it desire things within that reality? Why do we feel hunger that consumes our thoughts? Why do we experience explosive anger, crippling fear, or deep, bonding love? And what happens when the brain's chemical reward system is violently hijacked by a synthetic drug? In our next video, we're going to dive into the fiery depths of motivation and emotion. We will explore the biology of sex, the terrifying mechanics of stress, and exactly how substances like cocaine, heroin, and even your morning cup of coffee rewire your brain circuitry to create the prison of addiction. You absolutely won't want to miss it. Please hit that like button to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss part 4, and let me know in the comments below. Which illusion of the brain do you find the most unsettling? Losing the concept of color, or forgetting the face of someone you just met? Share this with anyone who loves to have their mind blown, and I will see you in video 4.